the smell of grass and leather. There were days when we'd play too. We'd cross the lines when the sun would shine and make our dreams come true. I had a glove on my hand and a girl in the stands. She stole my heart like a hit and run. It seems the world was so much simpler back then. We was just out there for fun. I pray for someone to hold your hand and baseball in the summer. Someone to walk with you when this world grows cold. Baseball in the summer. Baseball in the summer.
To the BrockvMac Legendary Rivals podcast. And I don't know where his other brother Daryl is, but this is Daryl Houston. And for those of you who have met Daryl, played with Daryl, watched him fight his brother Larry on occasion, will know that this is one guy that you would take into any baseball game on your team, because one of the best teammates and one of the highest impact players I've ever played with. Daryl Houston, welcome. What are you up to these days? Because you're looking pretty relaxed right there, bud.
Well, that's a very complimentary introduction. I don't know if it's warranted, but thank you. It's great to see you, Mike. I've been following along the different podcasts you've been doing. It's great. I think I need this in another 20 years so I can remember what I did now, because I tell you, a lot's coming back. A lot of things are coming back, and maybe some things that I don't remember, but they probably did happen. I'm out in Victoria, BC, and my family and I moved out here almost 4 years ago, and we're kind of enjoying the Hawaii of Canada, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. But no, we're in a good spot. We're doing our thing and living our lives. So definitely enjoyable.
I see the odd Facebook post from you where it looks like you guys are really enjoying the trappings of living on the West Coast. So Tofino and there's lots of shots of you guys hiking and that kind of stuff. So we'll get into, there's a guy from the McMaster team, Dr. Scott Hughes, who's out in Kamloops, who's he's gone into very wax eloquent about life on the West Coast and, how lovely it is. So we'll get into that for sure.
I like to tell everyone it's a terrible spot to be, and that way we just keep it for ourselves. But it's good. It's a good spot. It's a good spot.
Yeah, it's but we'll get to cover all things. This is going to be a wide-ranging series of subject matter because we played together before we were at Brock, so that just means we'll have lots of unique stories regarding your career prior to Brock. Daryl, why don't we just start with, your Larry kind of covered it, but growing up in Pontypool, Ontario, and being kind of an outdoor kid already, and where did you discover your love of sports? Was it from playing with your brothers?
Yeah, I think my dad played quite a bit of sports when he was growing up, and I think when you grew up in Pontypool, we weren't even inside the town. My parents still live in the house we grew up in, and they built it. And there's 60 acres of ponds and forest and all of that, and we didn't have cable. We had bunny ear TVs, and obviously sports on TV or anything else we were watching didn't exist like it does today. So we really had to find a lot of ways to keep ourselves busy. And, for my poor mom, I mean, there's 3 boys, in our family. And, I'm sure, it was a blessing to get us outside and get out of the house and don't destroy anything. And if you did, make sure it's in the basement before it got finished. And, but yeah, I mean, we just, we enjoyed doing a lot of things outside, and, naturally everything became competition. somebody had to win. There's no sense of playing if there wasn't a winner and a loser, and you didn't want to be on the other side of that. But I think a lot of it came from that, just being creative in what we could do, and some of the games that sports we created. I don't even remember what they are. They're so crazy, but my dad always had a love for baseball, and that was kind of the big one that I think we really connected with growing up. I still remember in '95 or in '85 when George Bell caught that last fly ball, going on his knees and holding it up, and my dad. It was kind of that sense of happiness and pride. I remember seeing him, at that moment, and that always kind of stuck with me. And I think baseball was, kind of a sport that I wanted to gravitate to and be a part of. And that's I think really where a lot of it started. Funny story. We played softball. Pontypool was a small town. It was 1,000 people, and they didn't have a baseball team at that point. So we played softball, and we actually Larry and I got removed from a team in a tournament because we were, they called us ringers. I don't know how you're a ringer when you're 7 years old, but we hadn't played with this team all year, and then we just decided to play. And it happened to start in a tournament, and I think we won the first game like 13-1 or something. And Larry and I, had most of the hits and the runs and all of that, and then they kind of removed us, and we said, well, what are we going to do? And we ended up playing soccer, and we played soccer for like 3 or 4 years. And I still remember my poor dad. He's like, I know nothing about soccer, but if you're going to play, then I will be there with you, and I will help coach. But I have no idea. His strategy would just kick the ball. Hopefully that works. Kick the ball. And then, I remember the day we said, we want to play baseball again. And it was kind of that feeling back from 1985 when, you had this sense of pride of, okay, let's go. Let's do this. And, that's what started our baseball journey for Larry and I. We're back in Orono. So.
Well, and I think, baseball, kind of, it probably was good that you guys had a departure into a different sport there for a while, because it's very active. You're always running, and that kind of stuff. For you, running was a big part of your game as a baseball player. Were these things that you were developing early? Like you were always a fast runner, and I think it was a bigger part of your game than it was Larry's. Actually, was your speed.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to run cross country and distance running growing up. I didn't actually run track until I think I was in grade 12. That was something I enjoyed. I like being out, in the wilderness and running. And when you're running a cross country race, you're not running around on a track. You're seeing different. The landscape's different as you're running, and so I always enjoyed that. I enjoyed doing things more so I guess with my legs, just to be able to kind of be able to build that skill, and it just something that I enjoyed. And when I went onto the ball field, like I would say my favorite part of playing baseball was playing defense. Hitting was always nice because you had that spotlight and that accolade at one time, but to me it was always defense first. How do I make the play to support team and the pitcher? And when I'm on base, my job was to move to the next base in whatever way I could do that. And it became fun, whether it was tormenting pitchers or it was trying to disrupt the game. I thought that, there's times, and I see it now in baseball, it was, maybe not the last year and a half, but it's become very stationary. And that would bore me. I think it bored me as a fan watching it, but I thought that was how you could bring a different element to the game. And, I was fortunate enough to be relatively quick. I mean, I wasn't always the fastest person, but, I was fast enough that I think I could make things a little bit different when I was on base. And when I was in the outfield, I caught for many years growing up, and, finally kind of got moved out of that. I think it just other players were around, and I wasn't, it was an area that I enjoyed because we controlled the game, but, put me in the outfield, and, that was my element. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So tell me about your first organized baseball team that you play on, and, was there coaching or players that stand out in that your first organized attempt at ball?
Yeah, we were, as I mentioned kind of earlier, once we stopped playing soccer and, we had a small community in Orono, really just about 10 minutes or so away from Pontypool. And, we were kind of blessed. We had, my dad, obviously, with his experience playing baseball and, being a coach, we had Pete Landers. I know he's come up in a few of your previous podcasts, and, Pete being our head coach. Then we had another guy by the name of Pete Martens. And we were fortunate to have them. I mean, they were all experienced, well-traveled, knowledge baseball people in a small town. I mean, we probably had 15, 14 players a year. So it wasn't like we had a big pool. There wasn't anyone being cut, who signed up and played, you're going to play. But yeah, we played Orono. I think, we probably, had the pinnacle that you can imagine for a small town your first year. We ended up winning the provincials. I don't know what it was, like D or something like that. But it was all relative to where you were, right? And there was quite a few people that we ended up playing with. I mean, Mike Landers was one of the big cogs there. And he was a pretty close friend throughout, and he helped lead the way for us a lot of times. Whether it's pitching, whether he's doing something else, he'd throw the gear on the catch, even though he had no idea what he was doing. But he'd do it to play, and just some really good friendships I think that we had. Obviously it was local, so we knew a lot of the kids as we were growing up. Some that had been in soccer now came over to baseball, and I think we were 2-3 years maybe in Orono, and then we had kind of got to the point where Mike, Larry, and I wanted to do something more, play something different. And, our parents were happy to continue to coach, but I think, they put a lot in, and, we had a chance to go to Oshawa, and, that was, kind of the big next step for us. But Orono was really the first spot where we started playing, and, we learned a lot. We got, really good skill sets that the coaches were able to provide. We got a chance to play in a lot of different positions and see what we liked or where we were good at. I couldn't pitch. So I learned that pretty early. Was reminded of that later on when I got to Oshawa, and that's a whole story with Gramps. But yeah, it was, it was, I think, for me, it was one of the most fun. Like, you're just able to be a kid, in that first year that we won, coming back late at night into the town of Orono, and it's the first championship that they had won in I don't know how many years. It was significant. We were in the local paper. We had the fire trucks that were running us through town in our own little parade. And, it was pretty special. I mean, you dream of those types of ideas as a kid. You think, okay, bottom of the ninth, Game 7 World Series, bases loaded, right? We didn't have that set up, but, to come home to that celebratory parade, and it wasn't 15 people. Like, there was probably a couple hundred people that were out in the streets on a Sunday night, a Labor Day weekend, celebrating, these 13, 14-year-old kids that have won a baseball championship. So, it's hard to not get stuck with the game, when you win with your friends. But that experience in Orono to start was pretty special. It was pretty good.
It's amazing, and we'll dive more into the dynamic between you and Larry playing on the same team, and Michael Landers a little bit for sure. You guys end up in Oshawa, and I assume that's either in Bantam or Midget, and you end up. I think your first coach was Doug Stone. Am I correct there?
Yeah. Yes, it was.
So Doug Stone's a classic for sure. He's fiery, a little bit like his father Ted Stone, and certainly his son Chad. They're all kind of out of the same Stone dynasty, as I like to call it, in Oshawa baseball a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what it was like moving to Kinsman Stadium, and what do you remember about your early days in Bantam and Midget with Oshawa?
I didn't know the history of Oshawa. Like, my mom was born and raised there, so it was always it kind of felt like home a little bit. I didn't know what to expect. Three kids from another place, and we didn't grow up in the fabric of Oshawa, but obviously Pete was well known. I know my dad knew some people. I mean, he played fast pitch in Toronto, in the beaches. So he played, against Pete, he played against Bob Solomon in that group. And so, there was connectivity. You kind of knew what you were getting into, but I tell you, it was such a simple transition. I think everybody in Oshawa embraced us and welcomed us. We went through tryouts and all of that, and we're selected to make the team. And but it just, like that first year, I think Chris Peters was, we were playing with him, and he was. I think I heard you guys talk. He was kind of a sandwich player, right? I mean, he was in a small group of his age, of our age, moving up, and we were always kind of overlapping with a bigger group, either above or below. But we connected with Pete's really early. He took us under his wing, so to speak, in Oshawa, and and then having Doug, Gramps is around, and my story of Gramps, we're unknowns, right? So we show up, I'm like, well, I'm a catcher. Gramps is like, well, let's see you throw, right? And I had a decent arm. So he's like, I think I can work with you. And I remember doing a bullpen session down the right field line in Kinsman. And decent fastball. He's like, show me a change. I'm like, I have no idea how to throw him, but let's try this. And he's like, okay, I can work with that. He's like, throw me a curveball. So I try. He's like, throw me a curveball. I'm like, I'm trying. He's like, okay, let's work on the grip. We're going to show you how to release and do it. He's such a patient man at times. And, I want to say he probably gave me 10 minutes of trying to throw a curveball. And he looked at me, he's like, maybe you're better suited for the outfield. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I am clearly understanding that I'm not going to pitch. And, if you need somebody to throw straight and, get an out maybe or not, I guess I was your guy. But, it definitely wasn't there. But I just remember, we had our three parents kind of coaching us. And then all of a sudden we had this plethora of people that would jump in and help out. And then, it was Oshawa. I mean, it was Kinsman. I remember walking in there, and they said I didn't really know much about the stadium when we started. But you walked in the first time, you're like, what am I walking into? Right? It's there's ivy on the outfield walls. You're kind of in a sunken field. I realized pretty quick I'm not hitting a lot of home runs.
It's
right field like was like 352 or something like that, but I knew I could run for days and try and track down balls if I was able to play in the outfield. But it was pretty surreal. I think then you're just assimilating with a bunch of new people, right? So as I mentioned before, in Orono, we kind of played in childhood friends, kids that we knew and we've grown up with. And now we go to Oshawa, we don't know anyone. It's three of us. I think that first year, they used to have like these EOBA All Stars, and we go to Port Hope, and we do tryouts and practices and all of that. And then the big tournament was playing in the Dome at the time, and having that spectacle. And I think his name was Doug Bema. I remember Bema last name, I didn't remember her first name, but that was the first time too that we kind of met the other guys in Oshawa. Brad Reeson, Kevin Solomon, Dave Hatch, to name a few. I'm probably forgetting more, but that was when we really met them because they were on that team too. So we started really connecting even further for the next year with the guys in Oshawa. But I think you go back in time, it was a big step. Trying to get into a different place, but you're in the moment, you don't really think about it. But everyone was embracing. I mean, they welcomed us and they made us feel part of the team right away. And I remember with Doug. He was tough, but he had expectations, and you represented yourself in a certain way, which was respectful and meaningful. It was probably the first time, even though as we had our parents run in, run out, that was the first time where that was the bar, right? If you're playing ball, you're going to run in, you're going to run out, you're going to hustle when you're on the field, and you can sit when you're on the bench. It was fun. I really enjoyed it. I loved, as a catcher in Oshawa, Doug, gave you a lot of responsibilities, which was pretty cool. But, if you made a mistake, or if you weren't, I wouldn't say so much mistake, if you weren't acting the way you should, which, I had those moments, he let you know, right? And it was time to correct. And sometimes, as you're a kid, you adults don't know better. I mean, we know better, right? But now as I'm the adult and my kids act up, I've got a different perspective. So, but Yeah, that's what I remember the first portion of our time in Oshawa when we started. Obviously, it evolved significantly after those first few years, getting into junior and beyond that as well.
Yeah, it's I remember when you guys got called up. So I was on the junior team, and it was a whole group of you at first. It was um, you and your brother and Mike, but also at that time, Reeson was kind of up and down between the two teams, and Solomon, and it was a transition for Oshawa. They were moving on from the Derek Minnix, Bobby McGrain, Jeff Pickle group, Curtis Hodgins, and you guys were coming in and making an impact on a team full of real veteran people. Like, it was a real veteran laden team of guys who played together for years, but really positive experience I think for everybody, because those guys, and I single out Chad and I single out Jeff Pickle in particular, Derek Minnix.
Was he the nicest guy?
Pickle was amazing. Like, God, he just had a smile, and he was great. He was a great player too.
Big pet.
Yeah,
he was always dirty. Always on base, right?
Always got dirty, but like, all those guys were always really generous with teaching you things you needed to know. But you guys get called up, and like, we end up in these wild brawl with Leaside in the playoffs of all things. And there were two brawls that year. Chad sent me a note after our last podcast to remind me that we had played Thornhill, and Sean Whiteley was pitching, and a guy bunted on him. And Sean chased him down the first baseline instead of throwing to first as a pitcher, and hammered him with a tag. And that just started a huge brawl. It was pretty rough and tumble, and that kind of baseball wouldn't fly today. There is no way that we would be able to get through. We had two brawls, and you guys were only up like a quarter of the season at that point. And I don't know what you must have thought of all that, but it was a pretty big difference.
It's not a secret. I mean, like, obviously we, my brother and I, but we enjoyed, being involved in stuff, right? And I wasn't a fighter by any means, but I liked it. It made it more exciting. I obviously didn't want anyone to get hurt or anything else, but what it probably told me is that you felt like you were growing up fast. When you're a kid playing Bantam, midget, that sort of thing, it's fun, and you're playing and you're learning stuff, and everybody gets to play, and then you get, you're playing in junior, and you're playing in the Metro League, and you're not playing. It's the first time, maybe every game you weren't playing, because there's other players that are just good. There's guys that are 3-4 years older than you, that you never really had to play with, because it was always kind of every 2 years. And you just, it kind of became a little bit different and real. And I think it helped make you mature and grow up a little bit more and faster, because you're not running into the guy that's the same age as you. You're running into a guy that's he's got a full beard, and maybe as a kid or two, and you're like, well, what am I doing, right? I don't. The Whiteley one doesn't surprise me. I mean, I remember many of times with him over that 1 year. I know the one with Troy comes up, has come up, and I remember I want to say I think I was in right field, but probably not. I was probably in left field, because he was usually picking in right, and then Jerry Brockman was in center, and I was in left. And but I remember that. I just remember thinking, like, what is happening? And
it was insane.
It was. I mean, even what happened later on, I know it's been well told, but it's just one of these bizarre things, right? And I think Chris Peters in his podcast with you, I mean, it probably articulated kind of the whole scenario of it. I mean, not the part of him taking the biggest guy and trying to act tough, but where Troy came out afterwards. But it did. It gave you a whole different perspective on it, right? Because I mean, we'd already played some interesting baseball. We had pretty successful teams early in Oshawa, where we played that bigger schedule because we played the Eastern Ontario sked, and then we played kind of that Metro Toronto sked. So we were, as kids, we were playing 80, 90 ball games in the summer. Attaching on tournaments and everything else, and then to pick up junior was even more, right? So it was I mean, to answer the question, sign me up, right? Like we were all in saying this is pretty cool on what we're gonna have to deal with. So
yeah, it was a deep outfield when you first got there. It was a deep team. I mean, Oshawa was deep because we were the easternmost Leaside location, so we were drawing players everywhere. And teams to the west that are now AAA, so Pickering and Whitby, were not at that time. So we would get the best of the Pickering players. We would get the best of the Whitby players, get the best of Ajax players all the time. And that's how we ended up with Jamie Waters and Jerry Brockman and Sean Nephew and these kinds of characters. Great players. But it also kind of brings me to something I forgot. But there was a kid named Shane Moore who played in Pickering. He was at the National Baseball Institute and was a catcher. And he had this flowing blonde hair, I remember. But we were all pissed off because the guy didn't come to Oshawa to play. He just wanted to play in his EOBA team for the year. So, the vets on the team got in my ear and said, this guy is chicken to come play in Oshawa. So I drilled him so badly in a game. And that's where the infamous rule came up, where Gramps told all of the catchers, if Poelman or Hatch hit someone with the ball, don't tackle the guy if they charge. Throw it back so they can beat him again before they get to the mound. And it was all because I hit Shane Moore in Pickering. And, it was a fun time, but totally different. It was very intense, right? Like the games were intense, and we had some crackerjack rivalries with High Park and, maybe not North York at the time. I remember High Park was heated. Leaside was heated just because of Troy. They didn't beat us a lot, but it was High Park, I think, was our main rival at the time. And you get a more prominent role within the Oshawa team in 94 when, oddly enough, the guy who triggers the huge brawl becomes our head coach. Do you remember what you thought of when they named Troy the head coach of the Oshawa Legionnaires after we had basically beat the crap out of him and his team for insulting our third base coach the year before?
Yeah, I think when I look back, I mean, maybe it's a little different, but in the moment, I was confused. I was wondering what was happening because I think we all projected that, hey, maybe he was going to get the team, right, and we're excited about that. I don't know the semantics behind all of it or what happened or why that wasn't the case. And I know Chris had mentioned some part of it, but I think that was probably the biggest thing. And I remember we didn't have the fondest of things to say or think about him, and it wasn't always just that one instance. It was many instances, right? You're just like who is this guy? And he's dressing his teams up in flashy uniforms, and you're getting swag and all of that. And part of me is like, that's pretty cool. Like I don't mind having that. I think we had sleeveless shirts one year, and gosh, I mean, some of them were ugly when you look back, but they were pretty cool then. But yeah, I think just confused was the main one. I don't know if there's anger because I didn't think that it was going to change a little bit, but it felt like it was also a change of the old guard. Not only from replacing, but when you think of guys like Doug Stone and Gramps and that, and I know that's been talked about before, but it seemed like there was now somebody different, an outsider, coming in, and I had been on that side. I had been an outsider, and I think it was not consciously, but subconsciously, is remembering that you treated people properly. Whatever the instance was, we're still there. We're going to be part of the team, and he's a coach, and he's going to lead us, and But I don't think at that time I probably took as much account into the volunteer time that these coaches did. You do as you get older and you respect that because you understand it. But for me, I think it was more just the courage to come in. And I know some guys weren't happy, and probably weren't to this day. I have no idea. I've never really talked about it, but I think for me, it was kind of being the young guy. I was there to play. If that's what it's going to be, and we're going to get nice jerseys and some swag, then let's do it, right? But
there is no I in team, Daryl. Remember that.
Oh my gosh, I think I have that T-shirt somewhere. I know I found my jersey. When we moved to Victoria, I was going through stuff, and I still had like an old Legionnaires jersey somewhere. I'm sure it's in a box now, but it was a Troy May special. Nice little button-up Legionnaires across the front.
Yeah, we had a third jersey too, which was really interesting. So like the uniforming was immaculate. But I will say this: as a veteran, Troy, we had these early. They called them tryouts, but there was only an influx of, I don't know, 4 or 5 extra players. And I remember one of them was either Chris Yeo, maybe? Is that his name? Yeah.
Yep.
Chris Yeo was new, and there was a few extra guys there. And but Troy called me into the office there at Kinsman and said, Mike, look, real simple. You're just going to pitch every 4th game or whatever it was, and we're not going to ask you to throw to the bullpen or anything like that. That's just you're good at what you do, and we're good with this. But he said, I'm going to do something a little bit crazy with the team here, and I want to get your opinion on it, which was he was going to cut 4 veteran players and 1 guy that was really tied to all the Eastdale guys, the second baseman. He said, I just want to change the culture, and I just want to make sure it's not going to make too many ripples. Well, the one guy who I played with for several years at that point was a pretty good arm. Like he could have pitched out of our bullpen for sure. It was a good bat. He cut him and his best friend. He cut an outfielder that we had there for a couple of years, and he then proceeded to have this big meeting where he said, I've sent Driftwood out to, at that point it was Port Hope, I think, and Bowmanville were the 2 areas where they sent. But that was shocking to the team, and I looked around and made sure that there wasn't too many people who were picking their jaw off the floor. But I always respected that he talked, because he would have had that discussion with myself and probably Chad Stone at that point. And I'm trying to think if there were any other graduating players, because there weren't a lot of our, maybe Jeff Pickle, maybe, or he had the respect to talk to the vet guys about doing something that was going to shake the core of the culture of the team. And our team took on more of a reflection of you and your brother and Brad and Kevin Solomon. It was more defined by those characters than it would have been the remnants of that older generation that was tied to Derek Minix. So it was pretty healthy. We ended up starting out like gangbusters, and probably had, I think we probably had the best team in the province that year. There was a bunch of things that came undone at the end of the year where we had, my brother in a hospital, so I wasn't there, and Mike Landers went through some stuff later in the year, but I think we lost Dave Hatch early, maybe to go to Oklahoma, I think. And, a few things that were problems as we got near the end of the year. But I would say about mid-season, we were probably the best team in the province, and a lot of what Troy did was working, and it's he probably was very bright on some of what he was doing.
Yeah, I remember that year. There was a lot going on. I remember we did. I mean, we started that year, and it felt once you kind of got away from the cloud of the change and like what is happening, and I remember a bit of the ripple effect. I don't recall a lot of the players that were. I do remember the scenario where they were cut, and but then we just started playing, and it seemed like it was fun. We all generally enjoyed playing, like playing for each other, and having a good year. I think a lot of guys are having success, and then around mid-season we kind of slotted in. Everyone had their thing, had their place. Yeah, I remember Rob left. No, it was Jason Lesh. Couldn't see at twilight, right? So it's either he started the game or he came in later. But it took a little while to figure that out, right? And then once that was happening, then we were good to go. I think and for me, that as we talked earlier with Oshawa, that was the moment where I knew the guys that were my age, and we knew the guys that were older, like a year above. And then there was the third year, like yourself, that we got to know a bit the year before. We all kind of knew each other. Right? I hear Chris's story about Eastdale, and I know talking with Brad in years gone by, and Kevin and Dave and all those guys. And it was the fact that they were together for such a long time, right? And they played for each other. And I think we had that year where it started that way. And I went sideways at the end of the year. The things just happened, right? Maybe we were just too lucky to start the year. So it balanced out as things normally do. But, it is what it is. I think, the one thing is that we saw what we were capable of and knew that we could do that, right? And that was a big deal. And I remember playing games there in Kinsman, and we actually had people come and watch. And it wasn't just casual. Like, you weren't just casually going to Kinsman. Like, you didn't walk by it and say, "Oh, there's a ball game going on." It wasn't one of those stadiums. You had to find parking, or you had a purpose to be able to go there. And people would come and they'd watch the game. And I don't think it was that year. I think it was the year after. And I remember, I think I was texting you this one night, and I'm sitting there, and Chris's dad, Jimmy, was good friends with Bobby Orr, right? And Bobby being the Oshawa General and Boston Bruin and all of that, and we're sitting there and we're doing warm-ups in the batting cage before the game, and people are filing in. I'm like, what is going on? Like, it was a regular game in July, but there's 100 people in the stands watching us warm up, and we've hit the big time. Like, maybe Dave Hatch was on the mound, and he's got all his girlfriends coming in or something. I don't know, but it was something else. And then down the right field line, we had the clubhouse, and then there was the bullpen, and there was that gate or that entrance to come in, and that's where we park, and we come in as we were pros or something, and some guys walking in with Jimmy, and I couldn't tell I was in center field at the time, and those 100 people all leave the stands and walk down past the clubhouse. Well, it's Bobby Orr. So I don't know what happened, but I'm sure people came to see Bobby when he was coming in, and came to the game, and he did his thing. He's the gentleman that he is, and signed autographs all day long. And as soon as Jimmy left and Bobby left, so did the 100+ people. They weren't there to see us, so it felt good at the moment. But I'll just remember that point up until when they left, and think that we were celebrities in our own mind. So.
Yeah, it's one of the more infamous points in my career was that there were people coming to the stadium regularly. So Troy had those programs made, remember, where they would, it was a program that we were all in there. But they had a family day promotion thing going on, and I had to pitch. So Rod Fillier was the home plate umpire, and I had a really good game. But when I have a really good game, I curse every call that's anywhere close, right? I'm like, dropping F-bombs left and right. And anyway, I come out of the game, it's 8-1 for us, and poor Mike Landers came in and didn't have it that day, so it was 8-7. So I'm incensed because we're going to blow an 8-1 lead in the 7th inning to Thornhill at the time. We ended up bringing up Hatchie to get through it. We win the game, but Lutton summons for me to come to the score booth. And, I'm like, oh no. So Lutton in his kind of way, he's like, Mike, wasn't a great game today. I'm like, what do you mean? I threw it. I only gave up 2 or 3 hits. It was 8-1 when I left. He said, No. We had this young kid come up and ask what the F word was, thanks to you. You do that again, you're going to be suspended for a game. I was like, these family day promotions, maybe you just want to check who's slated to pitch, because if it's me, it's not going to work. If it's, maybe pitch Jamie Waters on that game, right? Jamie was always nice and composed and didn't swear at umpires or do any of that stuff. But we had fun. We were a rough and tumble team a little bit. You guys were super high impact. You and Larry would always be disruptive on the bases or stretch singles into doubles a lot. I remember that. Were you guys competitive about your baseball, or did you just kind of egg each other on a little bit?
I'm sure we were. I don't recall any time that we ever made fun or bugged each other if we had a tough game. We were competitive. I think we're our own toughest critics. Who would have thought, back in the day that if you're 30% successful, you're a multimillionaire, playing a game, right? And, putting that in perspective and knowing that if you, are successful at the plate once a game, you're successful. But I think we had the expectation of I've got to be successful all the time. I think if one had success, the other one would push to be as successful or do anything. I'm sure there was like anything else, bantering and ribbing and all of that, that would happen. But I don't recall a game where we would come out and we'd be mad at each other or anything like that. I mean, we just, I guess, had high expectations. We were, I don't want to say high strung, but we were intense in what we did. And probably even to this day, we're like that with some things, just our makeup and who we are. But I think we fed off each other a lot. That in most times was healthy. It come off differently, but it was who we are.
One thing I remember specifically about you guys is you didn't chirp the opposition. I don't remember you guys remember you guys maybe getting into it with the opposition if it was warranted, but I don't ever remember you guys chirping at umpires or the opposition. And that was, you were harder on yourself than you were anyone else. And, it's an amazing thing. So hard at that time, we're starting to see a little bit more of the badgering of the opposition make its way onto the field. But there was still enough old crotchety people that were trained by Gramps around at that point that if you lipped the other team, you could expect one right between the numbers. And, beanballs were still a big thing. And, I remember you getting hit by pitches, but not on purpose. So you would lean over the plate a lot and get hit on your front shoulder. But
I mean, when you're not a good hitter, you got to figure a way to get on, right? So, if that was the case, then you do it. So,
have I mentioned that you're really humble, Daryl? So why don't we talk a little bit about the Ontario youth team at this point? Because this is another evolution of your career and a really interesting chapter in it. Tell me how that all kind of unfolds for you.
Yeah, I think we talked about the EOBA teams that we had, and I think that was a bit of a landing or a starting point. Where you get to go into what is ideally the best players of each league into an all-star team, and then you play against each other. We started, we made the team, that EOBA team, when we were 16, so first-year players. So you kind of, I guess you get seen or you get watched. And I remember going through the tryouts the first year, and I think I made the first wave and then got cut in the second wave. But, it was just, kind of semantics. And then the next year was a little bit further. I think I was one of the last rounds of cuts. And I think that was the year Brad had made it. He played on the youth team as well, and but he was a year older than I was. And then the last year, I remember going through it, felt a lot more comfortable. I actually was on the team for 2 spots. So one is I could catch, which was helpful because that was an additional catcher. So they did have me catching some exhibition games and everything else coming in, so bring your gear, want to see what you can do. But then it was the outfield and, playing center and all that. So, I think it was quite interesting. I remember finding out that I made the team was the year we were in the final of that dome tournament playing for EOBA. And I found out before the game that I made the team. I was pretty excited, but we had something to do, right? And, it was, I remember it was a good game. To me, that was, I think Larry had getting like the winning hit. He was the MVP of the game. Had a pretty special moment. And, it was so hard because you wanted to be able to share and be excited about what news I had. Because I didn't even tell my parents yet. Like, they didn't know that was something that I had made, but it was Larry's moment. I mean, that was his time. It's pretty cool when you get a winning hit in the dome. Like, it was fun to play in there. Like, it was pretty unique at the time. And, but that was kind of the start. And then, you got to play with some pretty good ball players. We were fortunate that year. We went up to Moncton and played out there. And we didn't have a great tournament. I think our first game we played Nova Scotia and got spanked. It was like 12-2. They mercied us. And I'm like, oof. What are we doing? And then I think we ended up winning like the next 4 games, but we lost, I think, in the 7s or something, and that was it. But it was a great experience. And, some of your teammates, you kind of remember you had that bond. I remember I still have a T-shirt somewhere from one of the guys in Team Alberta, and it was the first time I think I got to see Ryan Dempster pitch. He was pitching for BC, and then Eric Gagne was pitching with Quebec. They were a year younger than me, but they were, you had the lineup, 7 deep around the stands watching these kids play because you knew there was something special. But it was a great moment. Fortunate enough to be a part of it. Never took it for granted. I think it's something that you always wanted to be a part of, and when you did, and it was different then than it is now. And that time there's still politics that play into it and everything else. But if you're the right player and got the right attitude, you have a chance, right? And nowadays, kind of those teams all get changed, and players are playing somewhere else, and kids are growing up playing in organizations when they're 14 and whatever else it looks like. But then it was literally they picked players from across the province, and it wasn't a 1-year thing. It was probably a couple of years of them watching and knowing who you are. And I think playing in Oshawa helped me with that. If I was in Orono, it probably never would have happened because we wouldn't have played in some higher level tournaments or higher level competition in that. So, but yeah, it was pretty special. And sometimes I look back at it, some of the memories I remember, one of the biggest things was when the scouts were watching, they focus a lot of time during your warm-ups. And I remember, being told that, and I think Remo Cardinal was one of our coaches, and he's like, when you do your outfield drill, you better have your best throws of the game because that's what they want to see, right? And there's literally scouts there with a gun watching you throw from center field, as you're going around the horn before the game. So it was a unique experience. I mean, Moncton was fun, small city, but they definitely embraced the tournament, and we felt like kings the whole time when we were there.
That's amazing, Daryl, and great experience for you. Which brings us to, Ted and I come knocking on your door and saying, why don't we try this Brock thing on for size? And I remember it started with you guys coming down to visit with Mike Gordensky. I think we were doing indoor workouts, and I don't even know whether Coach McRae was on board yet.
I don't think he was. No. No. I remember going down there, and I remember being part of the indoor workout. I don't remember a whole lot. I remember us going out one night. Did we go to Isaac's? Is that where we ended up going? I can't remember.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because I can't remember because I, wasn't in a different state. I just, it's a while ago and I'm old and all that sort of stuff. But I think, it was interesting because I didn't know what to expect. I had opportunities to go different places. There's a school in Chicago that I was, thinking of going. I wrote SATs and applied and got in, but money was a factor, right? I probably didn't have the courage to really get up and go to the U.S. Even though I remember Kevin Sullivan was trying to persuade me. He's like, "There's a great place in Iowa, right? Other than that cornfield and the movie." But it felt like it was a good compromise because I don't know if I wanted to move away from home, that far. Yeah, I remember the visit, and I remember you guys were kind of trying to persuade and everything else, and I think we were probably already there anyways, and we just kind of let you go for a bit. It was nice to be wanted.
Yeah, we trotted out Todd and I, of all people, to meet with you guys in Isaacs, because Todd, was just such a great attitude. He's kind of infectious and big old country boy, that everyone kind of loves. And aside from the fact that he was humongous at the time, I'm thinking, Jesus, this is our literally we had 6 catchers come out, and Todd was probably the 3rd or 4th guy at that point. But he was humongous. He's 6'5", 230 pounds, and just this huge, big, friendly guys like Little John from those Rocket Robin Hood. It was kind of like, geez, this is the guy where. But he was perfect to talk to you guys about coming to the school because we wanted it not to just be about the baseball. We wanted it also to be about the quality of the people that we knew were in the program at that point. And it takes a huge step up with Coach McRae because he's clearly very organized and is going to run a big D1 program. But, you guys go away from there. But in prep of all of this, something I didn't know, you went and played for Oshawa's hated rival, High Park. So, I am so sick of High Park in my life that I live not far from it. And every time I look at Christy Pitts, I kind of go, because we had some hellacious games against High Park. What made you decide to go play for the High Park Braves?
Yeah, it wasn't, it had nothing to do with the fact that I had moved to Toronto then. So I was living with my grandfather, who lived in the beaches. And, it was easier for me to go to High Park than it was for me to go to Oshawa. And, because I'd be going there in traffic and everything else. And it wasn't anything to do with the team. It was just, that was the opportunity I had to be able to continue to play. And I wanted to. That was big for me. And I also, I think for me at that time, I played less games. And I needed a bit less games to play. Because at that time, I was starting to work and everything else, and High Park, did that because we didn't have the dual schedule that we had in Oshawa. So, but also, I when we talked about the youth team, I played with a guy by the name of Kevin Kim, and Kevin was like, "Hey, you should come and play." And I knew some of the players. There's, like you said, we had that battle. I remember the battles. I remember the dislike because I think we usually came on top against High Park. I think our kryptonite was Windsor, the Windsor Stars, right? Whenever we would get into provincials or eliminations, it was them that would get us, not anyone else. But in league play, I remember always having battles with them. They had some really good players. You talk with Kevin, Matt Sperling, Chris Dorian, right? There's some pretty special talents that were there. And, one of who became one of my good friends, this guy Rob Spezic, who was their first baseman, and it was the opportunity. It was surreal standing on the other side of the diamond in a High Park Braves uniform, looking across the diamond, seeing an Oshawa Legionnaire. But I'd say there was probably if I had good games in the year, it was probably a little more special playing those games and being able to try and beat Oshawa, but I was playing against a whole lot of friends, right? But yeah, that was, really, it came down to just me living in Toronto, and it was easier for me to do that. And I felt weird, but I didn't. But it was still weird. But it was only 1 year, so
have arm will travel, Daryl.
That's true.
Tell me a little bit about you get a house in Thorold with Peters, Larry, and JJ.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the decision to kind of live in a house in Thorold, and we come to training camp, and no one was prepared for what we saw there. So I wouldn't have done a great preview job because I didn't know what I didn't know. I knew what was coming from the indoor workouts, and I knew a couple of the recruits. But tell me a little bit about what that was like, because we all have a different recollection of it.
Yeah, I mean, the living part was, obviously we knew Chris, and he's like, should we get a house together? And to me it was, yeah, that'd be great. I didn't know Jay until we moved in with him. I think he was second year, and he was a lacrosse player and that part. And I think that was, it was more just, I think Chris did all the legwork on that. Hey, he went and got the rental and everything else, and we just ended up having the chance to live together, right? So Thorold, I mean, it didn't matter to me where we were at the time. It was just a place to live. And, I don't know if we ever thought about doing residence. I never pictured that as being, something I would do. So it was pretty cool to have the chance to be in a house. I remember we had a rental house next to us, and I think there was like 4 girls in there. I want to say they went to Brock. I'm not sure, but it turned into a time where it ended up. I mean, we never locked the doors. Like, we just didn't have to. Probably because we didn't know where the keys were at the time, and it was an easy way to get home and get into bed. But we prank each other's, and I think the one time, I don't know if it was Chris who did it or Jay, but we saran wrapped the toilet bowl. And I think that was probably the end of the prank because it might have gone too far, but it was good. It was fun. And it's ended up kind of they were I think they were second or third year, but most times you don't just have a bunch of guys that are moving first year together. But yeah, I remember that. But
30 years of therapy later, these poor girls are probably still swearing and saying, "Those damn guys, Jesus."
Well, my daughter's not going to watch this, so we'll be okay. So, but yeah, you feel bad, but it was funny, so it was worth it. Nobody got hurt. It was all good. So, but yeah, I mean, we get there. It's I think we were a week before school started. We were probably the weekend before, and we kind of get settled in. This is our first time, away from home. Like, you've been away on a weekend, that sort of stuff. It was the first time living away from home. For me, it was, and it was comforting at least to have some familiar faces. But we I remember showing up to the Diamond. We didn't really know. We knew some people, but I think we were like the furthest east. I mean, Kiddish obviously was further east out of Ottawa, but we were the furthest, kind of east, and we kind of knew who we were, and but didn't know really a lot of the other guys. So it was, pretty interesting as you're trying to evaluate and assess, right? Because that's kind of what you do as a player. Maybe it's who's my competition and what I'm looking for, and you can tell in some cases, that guy may not make it. We had a couple of those, but overall, I think it was a relatively competitive group, and I think everybody, if you didn't come to play on the first day, by the second day, the pace and the urgency increased. You could definitely see some people looking and saying, "Holy shit! Like, I need to step up a little bit." And I remember when I think it was first day, we were just doing outfield throws, and you see like Juziak throws, and Rick Bottomley throws, and I'll throw, and then some lefty comes in and throws a seed at third base. I'm like, "What is that?" And it's Tish, right? I'm like, who is this guy? But it was, it was good. Like, I said, played on good teams growing up, but it felt similar, right? Like, it was an elevation up, and it was good. I mean, I'll say I didn't probably feel worried through all of that. I think for me, it was a chance to play more. I mean, a couple of weeks before camp had started, I tore ligaments in my right ankle, and that crushed me a little bit. I'd never been hurt before. Bumps and bruises and that sort of stuff, and never broke a bone or anything else, and maybe had a twisted knee, but nothing too bad. But I can't remember where I was playing, and it was on pickup. I got picked up for a team or something, and I was sliding to second base, and they had those like metal holes in the middle of the bag, and it didn't pop. What popped was my ankle, and I remember like I stayed on second base. I think it was the last inning. And I was on. We were down by 2, so it wasn't like it was an important run, but I wasn't. I didn't need to be pulled, and I was toughing it out. And then we ended up losing and we're at a tournament, and I remember getting in the car. My dad looks at my ankle and he's like, "You're not taking that shoe off." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You take that shoe off, your ankle's gonna balloon." Like, he's like, "Something's wrong." So I tore ligaments in my right ankle and could barely walk for about a week and a half. And then I'm like, "What do I do?" Like, I'm going to Brock to play baseball. Like, that's what I want to do. And it's a short season, and I got to be ready. I remember that was in training camp, where that was probably my biggest concern, is like, what if I can't do what I can do, right? So I remember, wrapping it up and icing it, doing all of that. And, thankfully at that time, you know about painkillers, so I wasn't doing any of that part, but it was, it was unique. But I'd say, walking in there, I don't know if I met Coach McRae at the time, but it was, you could tell that there was a purpose to the practices, and there was structure. And we were doing two days then, morning and afternoon, and it didn't matter then because we didn't have class, right? And then we're next week we're doing Frosh Week, and I think by that time the teams had kind of been settled, so you knew what you were walking into. But it was better than I expected as far as like the structure and everything else, because I didn't know what we were going to get into, as you said, and it was a lot more intense than I think I was anticipating, which was good, because that matches kind of my personality that I have as well.
Yeah, and look, you would have had exposure then to. Tell me a bit about your early interactions with Daryl Kemp, because obviously Daryl's a guy always was a big fan of you and the way you and your brother played the game, but he was also really important for the guys that were out there trying to hit, and was maybe everyone's first exposure to a kind of a professional hitting coach. Say a little bit about what your thoughts were of Daryl, who's pretty cool on a baseball field, and just a little bit about what you thought of Coach Kemp.
Yeah, I remember you knew he was somebody when he was on the diamond. He just had a swagger and that aura about him, and when he spoke, you listened. I remember that, but he had such a gentle touch. Like, he'd make a comment to try and ease the situation, try and get you in your element, or something just to make you don't think about what you're doing. Like get it out of your head, relax. He was good at identifying kind of your swing and how to set it up, and how to approach. That was a big one. Was always around approaches. Which I had a couple of good hitting coaches prior to that. When I played with Ontario, Ricky Johnson he would help with the outfield and hitting. So he provided a lot of that kind of structure as well, which was good. But Daryl just had a different way of going about it. You could tell when he was genuinely wanting to invest that time. He would give you all day, right? He would offer, if you want, meet me at the park at 3:00 and we'll take swings, right? But for me, a lot of it was around the mental space, the head space. Think of the situation. What's your approach? Consistency in the approach. That was a lot of it, and really it was a calmness, but it was also an element of like, I want to kind of be like that guy. Like he was a cool dude. Like you wanted to be around that, right? It was gravitational. But that's what I remember the most about him. Like you had this airability about him that you wanted to be around and respect, which was pretty special.
I won't touch on the other coaches quite yet, because we'll touch a little bit about, you make the team obviously, and we hop into the season. But one of the unique things is we've really got 4 great outfielders that are playing through 3 positions plus DH. Tell me a little bit about what the dynamic was with the other outfielders. Did you guys have a sense of competition, or were you guys egging each other on? Was there some tension? Do you remember that?
There wasn't any tension. I think, we always, I can't speak for everyone else, but I think, I respected everybody's game. They were good players. They were good people as well, and I think that was important. Again, for me, I never really looked at what somebody else did. It was always about what I would critique myself, and that was who I was. That's who I am, right? As I said earlier, I'm the hardest critic, but You always hope that somebody would succeed and do well. If they didn't, you knew it was your time to step up. But I think it was always healthy. And one thing I remember is it just the ground coverage of the group in the outfield, as far as it wasn't easy to get a ball in the gap. It wasn't easy to run on. It was a darn good outfield. And I think that everybody brought different elements. Rick was fast, right? I mean, he was super fast, great arm, covered. Tinish had power, plate coverage, arm. Juice is scrappy, right? There was never any animosity. For me, it was how do I get my playing time, right? And probably the hardest part that I had was knowing I had an injury and how do I force through it, right? I probably shouldn't have played to some extent, but that's too dumbheaded to think any differently, right? So you just power through and whatever, you got another ankle and you figure it out. But it was a good outfield, and I think everyone had the right to play. I think it was a good enough team that anyone could play, and pretty much anyone could play anywhere. Maybe finish on the corners, but we had 3 center fielders for sure that would have been able to play anywhere. So.
Yeah, super cool, Daryl. Do you have some memories of the season that stand out? I mean, we'll talk a little bit about Cooperstown at a certain point here, but let's take everything except Nationals and Cooperstown, and you have some things that stand out. And I know one of them is you kept facing a guy you would have played with in High Park, but U of T had Mike Loretto always. It seemed like he pitched against us all the time because they only had the 2 pitchers. But just a little bit of your memories of the season, and we'll talk a little bit of the friendships that are developing as well. But just a little bit of a recap of the season, if there's anything that stood out for you.
Yeah, and for Loretto, I mean, every time he threw to first, it was a balk. Have that out in the open too, but I remember portions of it. I probably remember more of the games we would play against the U.S. team just because it was different. I remember the MAC games, of course, because they were a natural rival. Not only from geographical but even players, right? With playing against Brad, who was a friend and a teammate. Now he's the enemy on the other side, but you got to cheer for him when he's up the bat. When he's a home run against, you're like, okay, it's, good job. But if we're going to beat you anyways, I think for me, outside of, I remember some of the trips we did. I think it was St. Bonaventure when we had the next time kiss me before you screw me comments, and we're kind of getting hosed, but just going in, it was kind of neat to be able to be that program that had that opportunity to play in those different areas. That was, for me, most of it. I don't know if I have a very specific memory. Obviously, the Cooperstown is well documented. The Nationals are documented in different stories and different thoughts because of what it was and the time and place and all that. But throughout the season, I just remember having the opportunity to go and play in different places, and where other schools weren't. And I really don't remember a ton of our games, league games, at all, which is bizarre because I'm trying. You go back and you try to get in the headspace and you think about it, but I don't have a lot of them. It was a bit of a blur, and I think probably for me, in full honesty, is I kind of mentally struggled that year playing because I wasn't who I could be with being hurt and not knowing if I was playing. I never. Outside of junior, when I was called up and I was, 17, 18 years old, I always played every day and never had to, share time, so to speak, right? And not being put on the lineup card every day was something that I didn't know how to handle. So for me, it was how do I power through it? How do I do better? And then it became the frustration and anger on myself because that's me critiquing who I am. So I think that probably took up a lot more space of my memory than anything else. But I tell you, it was, we'll get in the friendships and all that thing. To me, that's probably what I take away from that year was the memories of the team, the moments with the team, and then the friendships that built afterwards, which I wouldn't change that. I'd rather have that memory than, memory of a bunt or a home run or anything else. That was probably more important, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, we'll touch on the last of the playing stuff here, which was, really in Cooperstown, from what I recall of this. I think probably, given that you've given some background on the fact you're battling an injury, it's a little bit frustrating. Coach McRae is pushing on you really hard, I think, comparative to, like, he's really wanting to get the best out of you. Probably not aware that you're hobbling around to the extent that you are. And we had this rule that if you struck out, you would have to run back to the dugout, not say anything, and you weren't allowed to toss equipment. One thing I do know about you at that time in your life was you're hard on yourself. You're exceedingly hard on yourself. I don't think you realized just how good you were. Even when you weren't good, you were good. Comparative, but I think there was a point where he pulled you from the game because I think he got frustrated after an at-bat, and then that kind of led to him sending you off the bench because I think you went at him a little bit, right? And, I think in retrospect, I look back and I go, it's a young Daryl Houston. It's a young Mike McRae. These are combustible elements a little bit. What do you recall of that whole situation?
Yeah, well, I think you spelled that pretty well. I mean, I hadn't played a lot that weekend. I think I was the second. Struck out. I don't know if I did a helicopter toss or I just, maybe tossed my helmet or something. I definitely, likely used a Poelman F-bomb or something. But, I did something where it wasn't appropriate. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't okay. But it wasn't anything that was probably over the top outside of, nobody's ever seen it before. But yeah, he pulled me and, quick trigger and said, now I lost my center fielder and I got to figure out how to finish the game. And then he sent me away. Said, it's time for you to get off the bench. That's not how we do things here. And that was it. And, I don't remember anything after that. I just knew that was the time where I was, I probably started to shut down. I knew it was there for the rest of the year because, that's what you do as part of the team. But I knew at that point that I probably wasn't going to be seeing a lot more diving time throughout the year. And it's I obviously have regrets on it, but I don't know. You can say what would I do differently, but I don't know if that would have changed a lot of things. Even if I went and played center, I probably wouldn't have played a whole lot of the rest of the year. I think at that point it was probably pretty set in what was going to be the lineup and everything else. But I didn't handle it properly. If Coach McRae did he handle it properly? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I would have done either if I was in the spot. Because I put him into that as opposed to anything else. But it was. I mean, it was one of the things I remember of Cooperstown. Everyone's talked about the kid shooting BBs or whatever in the outfield and that, but. From a ball game, that was probably one of my least favorite moments.
Of course,
but it is what it is, and hopefully you learn from it and move forward. And I like to think over the years I did, but at the time, heat of the moment, that's what happened. So,
yeah, listen, Daryl, I from what I recall, or at least I've taken a retrospective look back, I know Mike didn't personalize things, so I know that you played a lot at nationals, I think. So I don't really think he penalized you for that, other than in the moment. And now that I've kind of spent some time talking to Coach McRae and understand the rationale behind the way he does decisions and the way he thinks about things, I think he's always trying to teach and push and get better and give you teachable moments. And it's hard because, sometimes, when you're really a talented player and you're fighting it for really the first time, you're facing adversity. I think he'd be the first to acknowledge maybe the better approach would have been to take you aside and say, and pump you up a bit. Probably needed that pat on the back at that time, but I think it was a different era too. Like, coaching was hard at that time. Ted Stone was amazing pitching coach to me because he was always pumping your tires, no matter if you sucked or not. And Tim was a little bit like that, but Coach McRae, I admit, was tough to pitch for on occasion. He was on me 2 pitches into a game once, and because he wanted to push you to a point where you went beyond being good and beyond being very good to a point of excellence, and that is something that most of us hadn't seen at that point. Our coaches would have been happy with what they got, as opposed to being thrilled with what you could be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Right. So I think Mike was just trying to get you to where he thought you could be, because to hear them talk now, the coaches knew what they had their hands on with you. And interesting, interesting. I'm sure it sucked sitting in the van in Cooperstown, and you're probably stewing pretty good knowing you. So I wouldn't have wanted to be the van when you arrived there. But, you also built some pretty enduring friendships on that team with especially the young Burlington guys. There was a slew of the young Burlington guys, Brian Simmons, Mark Soyan in particular, really, and Chris Grucci. They all kind of bonded with the Oshawa group. And, clearly we all hung together. We were pretty tight. But tell me a little bit about Bill, some of the relationships you developed on the team.
Yeah, and we talked just recently about like kind of that first couple weeks, right? And you're out on your own for the first time, probably prone to make the wrong decision every time. It's funny how fast money goes when you really don't have a sense of it. You think you do, but you don't. You're like, I'll buy lunch today, or I'm going to buy a round of the bar, and all of that. And I think after the first couple of weeks, shit got real pretty fast, right? Because it wasn't replenishing or anything else, and but it was, you take that into account that you're trying to figure out how to live on your own, navigating a whole bunch of new people, where you were always in an environment in high school that you knew everyone, right? In some cases you've gone to school with somebody for 12 years, or you knew who your friends were because they grew up in your town. You played ball with them, whatever, and now you land on your own somewhere else. And I mentioned the fact being with Chris, my brother, it was at least some familiarity, which was important. I actually totally forgot about Grucci staying on our couch for the first few days, but I remember it vividly now. And that the nights at Front 54 and the Maltese Falcon, and it's but it was those types of things that were, it made it feel like it was okay, like you're going to be okay. And then I run into 2 guys like Mark and Brian, and I think we just kind of hit it off, where there was some similarities, some commonalities, whether it was, I loved music, and Mark had a very similar kind of genre of what I like to listen to, and we attended a couple concerts in the year and a half we lived together, and Brian was just one of the guys. He was such an easy person to get a chance to talk to, and sometimes laugh at and chuckle with, but he made you feel like you fit in, right? And I'd say those first couple of weeks, I couldn't imagine another scenario that we would have went into our first year of school, and like you'll figure out how to fit in, but how we fit in as a group. Going into Front 54, and you've got 12 ball players coming in because they already had 2 weeks under their belt, and some people are there in their first week going like, what has happened? Like, these guys had moxie, and we were somewhat arrogant and probably over the top, but we're also generally good people, right? That want to have a good time. But we went in there knowing full well that we're gonna come out making a ruckus. Like, we were there for a good time, and I think that helped us. That helped me. The first part of the year really feel comfortable. Going to school, because I had ball, and I've heard it in a couple of your podcasts. Where you talk about once ball was done, like, it felt different. Like, you had this void, right? And it was different. And some of these friendships though, helped fill that as well once it was done. But those first couple of weeks, it was a blur. I mean, your 2 days. Frosh Week happens, you're not really doing school yet, and then and you're playing ball and having fun. But I think that second year, I lived with Brian and Mark. We were well and Avenue. I can't remember the street, but I was in St. Catharines then at that time, and we were in this. It was an older home. I mean, I think I can't remember the whole story. Like we rented it, and it cost us there was 5 of us, and it was like $200 a month, and it was all inclusive. Like we didn't have to do utilities or anything. And they had a flood in the house, so they kind of renovated. They did drywall and some primer on it. But the guy's like, "I'm gonna put carpet," and we're like, "Don't put carpet. Don't put carpet." It was like these little barn plank floors, and we're like, "We'll just destroy it." Like we knew we would kill that house. And Brian was. I think there was one room on the main floor is the one I got. I didn't have an outlet in my room, so I had one of those outlets that you screw into your light socket, and I had these streams of extension cords coming down to plug in stuff. I mean, we didn't have big electronics and stuff at the time, but you needed to plug some stuff in, and it was pretty janky as a place. And I remember one day with Mark, and actually I was the only one at home, and I get this knock on the door, and I go to the door and I answer, and there's 2 police officers there. I'm like, it's bizarre, right? None of us. You'd think that none of us would have done anything that was too bad, but you never know, right? I mean, there's nights where you may not remember the next morning or 2 moments later, or maybe for a week, I don't know. But they came in and they had a search warrant that they had talked to the owner, I guess, of the place, and the owner was pretty mad, I think, after the first couple of months because we didn't care about utilities. Like the lights were on, windows were open, the heat was up, it didn't matter because we weren't paying for it. And but yeah, so they come in. And they have a search warrant, so they walked around the entire house. And then the guy's like, "Well, where's the basement?" I'm like, "Well, it's there, but I've never been down there. I have no idea. It's like a crawl space or something." So they went down there, and I'm like, they didn't find anything. So I remember asking the guy. I said, "So, officer, what is it you're looking for?" I have no idea. And he's like, "Well, we got notified by the hydro company that there was a severe spike in usage." So they thought we had a grow up in the house. And, I'm sitting there going thank God, right? Because I'm pretty sure that one of the roommates had a massive Ziploc bag of weed underneath their bed. And they didn't have any dogs or anything with them, but they're walking around looking for a grow up downstairs. Well, it ends up that the woman who had lived in the house for the previous 2 years, it was this guy's, the person we rented off, it was his mom, who was 90 years old and blind. Well, she never used any lights because she didn't need to. And then it was basically dark for 6 months when we did rentals. So, but kind of went off tangent there. But that was that first couple of weeks or whatever, we definitely built a bond with some of the group, and I think overall we all would go out together and hang out at the bars and enjoy each other's company, but there's always those that you kind of gravitate to more. And that first year we said we lived with Pete, my brother, and Jay, and then the next year when it was with Mark and Brian and 2 other guys, and that was a whole different element. It was away from baseball. None of them. We didn't really talk a whole lot of sports. We were doing other stuff, and just had a good time. Hanging out with each other, but. Yeah, I remember. I think it was Mark and Brian's first year because they had lived with 2 of these guys. And we put one night we put the liquor store up for sale, and it was a Saturday night. And at that time, the liquor store, because I think it was across the street from them, and because their house went for sale, and they didn't want it to sell, and because they're like, "Well, this is a great house. We want to be here next year." And so we lifted it up and we put the liquor store for sale across the street, and it was a Saturday. And at that time, the liquor stores didn't open on Sundays. So it stayed for sale for 2 days before the sign went back up. And I think Simmons had a newspaper dispenser, those little dispensers, you put a quarter in, you take it out. He had one of those in his room. And, I remember going in and we put a quarter in. I don't think we ever got the change because we couldn't get the change out of it. But we put a quarter in and the same freaking paper comes out every day, right? Because you're just reading the same paper. But yeah, there's some bizarre stuff that we did. And But at that time you're like, okay, these are some guys that have a different element that was outside of ball, which would be fun to be around. So.
Yeah, so we won't need to dive in too much. Like we've covered the national championships to death. Tell me a little bit about your decision to walk away from playing baseball and what comes next for you, Daryl, after, obviously you stick on for a second year but where does your journey go from there?
Yeah, I think, just one thing with nationals, I think, some of the stories that were said, and it's great because, as much as as I've listened to the podcast and, everyone's memories and, it's kind of a vast, I mean, you've all got a lot of the main things, when we talk about the final game and the final outs and all of that. And, Green's speech, in the room with I don't know, he mispronounced, but it was, Carpe Diem, like seize the day, right? I remember coming out of it, and it just kind of loosened the group up a bit, and all of that. I mean, you see leaders at that point already, right, in life. And, I remember the ride going in, I remember Scott Juziak, and he was talking about, what do I need to know about, Quebec? I've never been to Quebec, as a Yankee coming up. And I think we had got him because we're like, well, did you bring your Quebec currency? Like you need to have Quebec currency to come in here. And he's like freaking out. We didn't have phones then to Google, like, do I need currency? Like, you guys are full of shit. But he was stressed out. Like, there was like an hour of like sweats of like, I'm not going to eat. I can't go and do anything. This is a disaster. I don't have Quebec currency. And, Jacques Cousteau, I think, was the prime minister at that time. Like, we had a lot of fun messing around on that part. But, I think a lot of it, he might have just, played with us on it. But, I think so.
You are such horses' asses. It's not even funny.
Absolutely. The poor guy. I mean, that's part of it, right? So it comes with the territory. But, and I think Montreal was cool, man. Like, you sit there and you look at, the importance politically of what we were there for. That we were there to play a ball tournament. It was special because it was the first one, the first championship. But we were there in a more important weekend than any of that. And I remember taking it in because we were downtown and we were watching everybody protest and voice. And one side of the street, I remember one side of the street was the older people saying, "I'm gonna separate." We're getting out of here. And then I remember there was a young group that was on the other side of the road that were like, we can't leave. Like they had a foresight knowing what would end up. And, to me, I remember that more vividly than some of our games, just because the importance of the moment. But, it was such a cool opportunity to be there. And, we didn't come out and win, unfortunately, but, I don't think anyone hangs their head down. And if anything, it probably fueled those guys who continued on afterwards, right? So.
Yeah, I'm not going to say this anymore because it's becoming cliche. But for us, McMaster, Laval, Dalhousie, okay, those teams were, with the exception of Mac was beaten out by U of T, and U of T never got their ring. But all those teams won national championships within a 4-year period, and you could see it. There's very little to choose between those teams, and their top ends were great. Like that pitching we saw against Laval was great. The pitching that the 96 team saw against Dalhousie was great. But, the reality is Laval and Dalhousie were both at those national championships and finished, second in their division, right? So, McGill had won the national championship the year before. These are teams that were great, and they had grad schools, so their players were there for 5, 6, 8, 10 years. And people underestimate how good the talent was in Canada, especially at the top end. It was great. So, I think that everyone shares in those championships that were won by those programs, even if they weren't on the specific team that crossed the threshold, because losing to Mac in 97 fueled Brock to win in 98, right? Like it's all of that. I want to touch on something that's unique to us. We both played with Brad Reeson as a teammate. And Brad's a big motivator behind the MAC program and why they're participating in this reunion weekend. Do you have any specific thoughts on on Brad Reason and what he was like as a teammate and a person?
Brad was. I don't know if I had another teammate like him. I mean, he was just a genuinely good person. It didn't matter who you were; he always gave you time and space to be who you are, to support you and embrace you. I don't think he said one bad thing about somebody that I had heard. I go back to when we started in those EOBA tournaments. He was. I didn't know who he was. I mean, we had never played against Oshawa, out of Orono. Like we kind of just had our own thing in Peterborough and those other communities. So I didn't know who he was, but I knew that this guy was special. We talked about, with Coach Kemp, where you just had this aura and this feeling, that somebody had a presence on the diamond. And, Brad had that when he played. I mean, he was smooth. He was calm and collected, although there was fire. Like you could tell that he had a desire to win. But he also, he made you feel welcome. And, that was one of the big parts, as I mentioned, going into Oshawa. We were made, to feel welcome. And a big part of that was Brad, even though we didn't play with him the first year, but we knew through the EOBA team, and, it felt like we were accepted. And, I think Brad always, he kind of had a lot of common interests with him, that we would talk about in the years we played together. And, I love, the outdoors and, getting into spaces where, you can be just, with nature, with yourself, with your thoughts, that sort of thing. And, he was special to be around. And, I think it's great having something to recognize and honor. I know you're a big part about, getting that recognition in Oshawa with him too. But, you knew you were in presence of somebody that was just a genuinely good player and, a good person, but, he was a good player also at the same time. I mean, it's, I remember hearing about it. I think I was in Edmonton at the time when I heard that it passed away. And I didn't know. I remember just sitting down, there was just those thoughts that kind of came back and, all the good thoughts, but, to think about how many people he had touched along the way. And my world was mainly around the baseball world with him. I didn't know Brad a whole lot once we were done playing ball. Definitely got our own ways and stuff. And I didn't even really know at that point what he had gone up to, because I hadn't seen him for many years. But it was one of those, sometimes you people pass on and they move away and you think, but Brad was a lot longer to think for me. And just the positivity of it, nothing was sad, obviously, in the situation, but, I always think it's the legacy of what they leave is the most important, and it tells the impact that people have. And Brad had that.
Yeah, no, Daryl, he's I just remember that twinkle in his eye when he would, there was times where he would step into that batter's box and you knew exactly where the ball was headed, right? It wouldn't matter how hard the guy threw, how great a pitcher he was. You just knew that it was going on a line over that second baseman's head into the gap between the center and the right fielder. And that he would do that silly little jog of his into second because it was a double every time. And, but he never showed up an opponent. He never did anything like that. He was just a gentle soul, and the McMaster guys were lucky to have him, and it was fun playing him. I never got the opportunity to pitch against him, which is something that, the two of us would egg each other for years afterwards, because we would play squash, and he kicked my ass at squash for years. I could never beat him. His hand-eye coordination was out of this world, and I quite a bit bigger than him, quite a bit stronger than he was, but I couldn't beat him at squash, and I needed something. So finally I gave up and played basketball against him once and kicked his ass royally because I was taller, and I had played some basketball in high school. So he was exactly how you would think Reese would play basketball. He was very methodical. He would line up a set shot. I just bullied him. I pushed him all over the place. But, I had to beat him at something. I couldn't beat him at anything that involved hand-eye coordination. But a funny guy, too. He used to do all kinds of silly little things when we would go out. Brings me to a time that I remember where it was the three of us and Chris Peters going out in St. Catharines. We end up in a pizza place. And there was some weird drunk guy there wearing a Tapa Keg of Beer shirt that you got really interested in. And you're like, that's a great shirt. And he was kind of an older gentleman from what I remember, kind of had a gray mustache and like a mullet. But eventually you're like, I really like that shirt. And he got pissed off and started poking you in the chest. And the best thing is I could see you turning red. So I'm like, oh my God, Daryl is going to kill this guy. Maybe, maybe Brad and I can step in and prevent his imminent death, because if the light switch goes off, you're going to kill him. And he had two friends with him. So we all stepped out onto the sidewalk for this big, tough showdown. But really, Brad and I were like pretending to be tough because we were afraid of what you were going to do to him. And I ended up wrestling him to the ground, and he was so drunk and so weak. I did it with my right hand. I pushed him right down into the cement, just put my knee on his chest and said to his friends, I'm going to punch this guy if he doesn't shut up, because if that guy gets to him, there'll be nothing here but a Tapa Keg of Beer shirt. Like, we would always have each other's back, and we always would have a good time. But in particular with you, we knew that if someone pushed the wrong button, it wasn't going to end well. So we kind of shielded you that night. But I remember Reese just sitting there smiling and egging you on because you love this guy's shirt for some reason. So I think for this 30th year, I think I'm going to get a custom T-shirt for you that says Tapa Keg of Beer, so you can wear it around your family and kids.
Perfect. I mean, yeah, I don't remember that, but I can definitely, I can picture that happening. I can picture Brad egging me on, just kind of like poking and prodding and kind of being like, just keep going.
Yeah, it's a great T-shirt.
It is. I mean, I actually, as I think about it, like I need to go and find one. I need to go and get one. That would be great. So.
I say to your brother all the time, I kept Daryl out of jail because you would have killed the guy. Let's move on to, you moving on from Brock and getting on with your life and what happens there and how you come to be a family man, on the West Coast. How does that go? How long do you continue playing baseball, and what things change in your life to make all these changes?
Yeah, I went back for a second year. I didn't play a second year. I think for me, I went to one spring practice or indoor practice, and honestly, like I couldn't keep doing what I was trying to do with my ankle. Like I needed some rest, and I think at that time I was just a little bit burnt out too. I played a lot of ball. For probably 4 or 5 years. In some cases playing 11 months of the year, playing indoor, doing whatever. And I needed a break. But then also, with the school, you started meeting different people. Because you always have that circle of friends that you played ball together or with that, had the same drive and same commonality. And then there was a chance at meeting people with different experiences and different likes. And you started diving into that. And, it really gave me a chance to kind of take perspective and pause. And I played the next summer. Well, I played a couple of years in North York, senior ball. And I think it was in the middle of my second year when I just stopped playing. I want to say I was 23. I haven't really picked the ball up since. And, at that time, I really started to experience different things. And, every year since I was a kid, I played, so it was a couple of years playing soccer. I played baseball. That was my summer. I did it every summer. You started in March, you finished in October. As a younger, you put the skates on, you played hockey, and you just cycle all over again. And I never really did anything else. And then, around that time, I believe I had met, who's now my wife, and her uncle had a cottage, north of Muskoka on a place called Horn Lake, and just outside of Burks Falls, just out of North Bay. And I was starting to experience cottage life, and the outdoors, and just doing something different. And I realized that summer that I didn't want to play ball anymore. And it wasn't that I didn't still enjoy the game or love the game, but there was different experiences that I had never, really had a chance to do. And that started to give me that. And, work, I was working then, I didn't go further with my education. I wanted to be a teacher. Just didn't have the energy to, kind of go through the education system at that time. I think, Mike Harris was the premier in Ontario at that time, and teachers were on strike almost every couple months. And I'm like, well, that seems like a weird thing to do. And I had a job with Home Depot. I was with them for almost 16 years. Ran stores for them, moved me out west. So when we were, as I ramble a bit, I think, I want to say I'd done a lot. I traveled around with Home Depot, opening up stores and doing different things with them. And my wife and I got married in 2004. And we lived in Muskoka. I lived in Bracebridge. And it was perfect because, we were in the middle of cottage country, and, we bought, I think in 2006, we had bought a cottage on the same lake that our uncle had. A cottage. So, that was kind of our thing. We're like, hey, we live in Bracebridge, we're 50 minutes to our cottage. It was the perfect scenario. We had jobs that, were pretty good. And, my oldest son was born in 2005, and we're like, yeah, this is where we're going to be, and this is where we're going to stay. And my other son then was born in July 2nd of 2007. And I get asked to go and move with Home Depot. And that's what started our progression out west. So, we didn't really have mobile phones or anything at the time that were, digital or smartphones. So I remember asking, like, where am I going? Where do you want me to go? And the guy's like, Lloydminster. I'm like, where is that? And, it sends me this, like, kind of like a Wikipedia page, but it was like, just a city, it was an explanation of the city. And I'm like, it's in the middle of nowhere, right? Like it's on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan. And so my wife and I said, hey, listen, let's do it. So we got up and we moved, and I opened up a Home Depot there, and I get landed there in September, and I have to, hire the entire team. I had no employees. I had hire my entire team, HR managers, part managers, all of that, and open the store in 12 weeks, right? So that's what kind of got it out west. So we bought a cottage, and then we moved, and still have a cottage to stay, which is great. It's kind of our landing space to get back. But yeah, we got it west, and I was there for a couple of years, and in 2009 we had a chance to move. Where Sarah, my wife, had said, like, let's get out of here, right? Because Lloydminster is an interesting, great city, but it's an oil city, and it's half transient and half local. So we always felt like outsiders. So we moved to Edmonton, and we were there for many years. I think 2009, and then until 2020 when we moved to Victoria. So now I'm in Victoria, and my oldest is off to school. So he just started in Vancouver Film School. So he wants to be a producer, and he's living in Vancouver, living a better student life than I had. He's sending me pictures of the salmon dinners that he's making at home, and I'm wondering how did we buy, like, how did he get these groceries? And I find out that Sarah's, she's paying for his groceries and they're getting delivered. And I'm like, yeah, he's eating better than I did. Because I remember we would have a keg party, and we get half the money that we would make from that keg party when we were back in St. Catharines to get cleaning materials to clean up, and mud to patch the walls and paint to paint it, because we might have had some broken walls, and then we go and buy like tubs of mustard and Italian dressing and whatever else, right? Because everything works well with bread. So meanwhile, he's got salmon dinners that he's enjoying, and probably fresh cut off the boat. So, but yeah, that's what's got us back here, and it's a perfect spot for us. The Pacific coast, and we're 3 hours behind everybody, which means that the world ends at 2:00 on a work day, because nobody in the East wants to work past 5, so you get left alone, and it's just a different pace, and it's a whole different world, and we love it. When we got to Lloydminster, we knew we wanted to be on the coast, and whether it was the Lower Mainland or on the island, we didn't know where, but yeah, we got here almost 4 years ago, and probably stay here the rest of our lives. Like this is home for us. And said my oldest is he's in film school right now, and my other son, I've got 3 kids. So my other son is he's in grade 11. He wants to be an engineer, so probably will attend UVic or UBC. And my daughter, who's the youngest, she's in grade 9, but she wants to be everything, like from a nurse to a veterinarian to a teacher to an artist, whatever it is. But she's a pretty talented kid, and I think they'll probably be out here and we'll want to be where they are. So that's kind of where we ended up, and enjoying life every day. I've talked about being in Florida and how great it is, with the surf and everything else, and we have our own spot out in the West Coast, which is nice. So.
Yeah, is it an obvious question? Is it difficult when your brother and your folks are back in Ontario? Do you find that tough from time to time?
Yeah, there's for sure moments. When your parents get older, it gets harder because you're not there as easy as you want to be. I mean, if we didn't have our cottage, we'd be back there even less. Like we at least go back every year. Spend a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks there. Like it's not ideal. I mean, owning a property that you only attend, a couple weeks of the year, but it gets us home, right? And so we're able to see our family, and up until recently, I hadn't seen Larry for years. And I was out there in February for a quick visit, and it was great to see his boys and get a chance to see them as they grow older, because they were kind of this tall last time I saw them. Now they're grown up to be young men, right? So, but in today's world too, like doing something like this, talking, whether it's via FaceTime or any other avenue that you can, I think COVID really expanded that navigation of tech, that you can feel like you're connected even if you're not side by side. So we figured ways out. My mom's a great texter, so she sends me messages, and I'll send her pictures of the palm tree, and it's got 3 feet of snow. So I'm sure that only gets humorous for so much time, but you always miss family, but your connectivity and your communication is what you make it as well. And I think we've done a good job doing that over the years, and continue to do it. But yeah, it's always different.
Well, I have I've opened up our own official business here for Brock, Pioneer alumni. So Peters is operating the bed and breakfast in Florida, and you have officially been christened, the Flop House for those of us who want to go out to the West Coast, hang at the ocean, Daryl. So
fair enough. I mean, if we need strong morning coffee, strong afternoon coffee, and evening IPAs, this is the place to come. So.
I think we all are going to throw down for the evening IPA, my friend. Listen, in 6.5 months' time, 7 months' time, we're going to get together for some pretty special people. And I know it's a big, it's a big thing, right? Coming from the West Coast. There's a guy on the McMaster team, Scott Hughes, who's in Kamloops. Another great guy. We want to kick the crap out of McMaster, obviously, because if we do, it's just bragging rights that they'll never be able to get back. But the reality is they're really great people, and these are great people getting together. Is there anything at that point that you're going to want to say to Coach McRae, given that I would say that, you and Peters may have had a different experience than most people, in that Coach McRae was trying to push buttons, that maybe there was a better way to get the best out of you guys at the time. I'm sure he didn't have a great insight into your angle, or Chris in particular is a guy that needed to have his role defined, and he was in an open competition at first base the entire year. So of course we know how that is with Chris. It's going to become, we're part of the kindergarten club and all that other humor he throws to mask the fact that he felt like he was letting people down. What would you say to Coach McRae?
You know what? Honestly, as you get older, you like I said earlier, I think for me, it's appreciating what you get. Right? It's just things that you can look in retrospect and say, I wish this was different. I mean, they build cars with the big windshield at the front, not in the back. right? So it's, more important to look at where you're going than where you've been. Although, and where you've been is important to understand. Honestly, I think we all had to learn different things, and I'm sure we all learned stuff on how we acted, or how we formulated a plan, or whatever it is. And I think for me, it's more of a place of thank you. Honestly, like, it's a commitment anytime people need to take on these challenges, right? And, I said I've opened some stores where you've got to learn, quickly how to, find the right people, create a culture, define their roles. But if you haven't screwed up doing that, before, if you haven't had the chance to try different things before, it'll never be perfect from day one, right? And I think coming into it, you and I talked a little bit before about we were trying to be a kind of D1 program, the U.S. program with scholarships. We all paid out of pocket to go to school, right? And to be able to give up a class to go to a practice wasn't a reasonable ask. But I understand, like, the ask made sense. But it was that ability to, have the courage to say, well, I'm sorry, I can't make it because I have to go to school. Like, that's my priority, right? So I think, that probably is something that would be different today. That was there. But, I think of him coming in and establishing kind of that culture and that base and that accountability was probably more appreciative than if he didn't. But at the end of the day, I enjoyed my year there. Wasn't, I'm my biggest critic, so wasn't happy with myself, but everything else was what it was, right? And, I think, like I said, anything that you say you want to do differently is all in hindsight. And it's good to look back at it, but if you second guess it, it's not relevant then. So
yeah, it's funny. I'm going to ask you something that's going to seem random but silly, given that you still had your Legionnaires jersey kicking around. Came up in the Grucci podcast that we all had those. Remember those weird necklaces where you would put your nickname on it, right?
Yep.
So you had Drill on yours, and you still got the necklace kicking around, or did that make it?
I think that thing lasted for like another 3 years or so, and then one day it fell off. And I remember having that moment like, oh my God, it's gone. Like it's no longer on me. I wore that thing around my neck for 3 years. I showered with it and all that other stuff, but and then it was gone. I was like, I wore that thing around my neck for 3 years. Like, I remember those. It was bizarre, but I remember it was taking the vowels out of my name, and that's what it was. So it was bizarre, but
yeah, it was pretty funny. Like, in that, I had a really long nickname because it's like a full polecat, right? And for some reason, I ended up with this stupid chain that had like all of that there. I should have just shortened it to PC, like people,
right?
like Jason Lesh calls me today. But it's the silly things you do when you're young, to identify that your teammates, that your friends, are the things that, those little tokens disappear, but you never stop being teammates. And I think that's the one thing I'm learning through all of these, is that it feels like 30 years is 2 seconds. I think that we all still love each other deep down, in a profound way, because we survived something that, and learned about ourselves in an environment that was really hard to handle. And I'm looking forward to getting together with everybody, and it isn't going to be about the quality of ball, I can tell you that. But it might be about the IPAs that we consume after it. Daryl Houston, thank you so much for today.
Mike, thank you. It was great to connect. I appreciate everything you're doing with this. It's bringing back memories. It's helping that memory muscle come in as well. But it's also great to know. In all honesty, is as you get to hear everyone's story. I mean, it just shows that we had a great group of people. Not even just good players, but good people. And like I said, I think that's more important on where people end up along the journey as well. But But I appreciate bringing the stories back. It's great to watch. Some tears, lots of laughter, lots of I can't believe I did that, but it's all relevant, and you're doing God's work, my friend, and I truly appreciate it. But great to connect with you. And
I hope the statute of limitations has expired on some of this stuff, because
we'll
sometimes I really love the idea of putting the local liquor store up for sale, but the sad part is it's kind of what they're doing. So
fair enough.
Thank you so much, Daryl. We'll see you, and I'll talk to you well before we get to
For sure.
September. But thanks for this.
Thank you.
Well, the smell